Hi, my name's Natalie Sanders. I am an occupational therapist that specializes in pediatrics and working with kids with sensory issues. This week, through my telehealth visits with my clients, I was reminded about the increased anxiety that both parents and children are facing today with stay-at-home orders, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that today and give some tips on what we can do to help increase our sensory stimulation or perhaps dampen our anxiety levels that we're feeling. And I think it's really important both for our mental and physical health. The anxiety is located in the amygdala in our brain. As our anxiety gets worse, the amygdala gets larger and unleashes cortisol levels in our body. How do we dampen these cortisol levels? Well, one way is by exercise. The other beautiful thing about exercise and physical activity is we're also engaging our vestibular system. What is the vestibular system? Well, it is located in our inner ear. It is responsible for detecting movement and gravity. With our playgrounds closed, our kids increasingly having screen time, with having to homeschool as well, we've become more sedentary, and it's harder for us to engage our sensory system and help reduce our stress levels. A couple years ago, I had a very vivid and candid conversation with someone who had been incarcerated for the past 20 years. Although he did not understand the sensory framework that we've learned in school, he clearly understood from a personal experience what sensory deprivation was all about. Obviously, we're not locked up for 20 years. Maybe 4 weeks, hopefully no longer than 8 weeks. But to a child, that can feel like a long time. And sensory deprivation does exist. He had brought up the visual system and how even just going back to his home city and looking at skyscrapers was a very interesting effect on his physical feeling of movement by just looking at the dimensions. He also talked about how color was very not present in the prison system, mainly looking at grays, whites, blacks, and how vivid colors had really brought and stood out just by being in a restaurant with him and looking at basic colors that he hadn't experienced in many years. He talked about the vestibular system in the sense of when he would go for a car ride, which wasn't often, maybe once a year to go see a doctor or be transferred, and just that feeling of motion and car sickness. I think that's important to think about if we're able to, maybe taking our kids out for car rides, just for them to get that sensory experience of movement. Other ideas that we can help for eliciting our vestibular system include riding our bike, going on skates, dancing, twirling, maybe just forward rolls in our living room. If we have access to a trampoline or swings in our yard, those can make all the difference. It's shown that even adults, if we would just swing 10 minutes a day, helps release our serotonin, which we know is very effective for fighting depression. Perhaps a porch swing or a rocking chair is all it takes for us to feel a little bit better about ourselves. The proprioceptive system works with the vestibular system. Our proprioceptors are located in our tendons, muscles, joints. It's our cells, and helps us determine how much gradation of movement we need to stay balanced. It works in conjunction with the vestibular system. One of the best examples I ever heard was your vestibular system, like I said, is located in your inner ear. If you were falling asleep in class or in a lecture, your head starts to tilt forward. As you're tilting forward, your vestibular system sends nerve signals down to the proprioceptor cells as they alert and adjust and say, oops, you're falling, and they pick you back up. Our largest areas of our proprioceptor cells are in our spinal tract. Some ideas to help us with our balance and getting that gradation of proprioception, as well as eliciting what we call heavy work to help us, again, manage our anxiety. It might be doing push-ups, jumping up and down, any heavy work of climbing, maybe GI crawling, maybe having the kids GI crawling and pulling a rope with their arms at the same time, monkey jumps, animal walks, wheelbarrow walks. Those are all great things that can help our children work the proprioceptive system as well to help reduce stress. The other system I'd like to talk about is the tactile system. That's a lot more tangential because we all know what it feels like to touch things in various ways. We have to remember our children, when they're engaged in school, they're often doing messy play, glue activities, art projects, etc. Those all help our fine motor skills as well. So thinking about that, what could we do at home? Well, if we're a little bit more subdued about wanting to get our children into messy things like slime, Play-Doh, putty, clay, things like that, maybe it's involving them in some cooking projects. It might be just loading extra cheese onto the pizza, cutting up things, mixing things with our hands. Those are all good things to help our children engage both with the fine motor skills as well as many kitchen tools, which create a need and strengthening for fine motor skills, as well as opening up those olfactory sensory system that we have in the smell component. So if we have children that are a little bit more averse to picky eating, different textures of food and flavors, by getting them engaged in cooking, that often opens up that channel so they'll be more likely to engage and eat what the family's eating. So it's a great way now to work on picky eating as well. The other last system that I'd like to briefly touch on would be the auditory system. That's another one that's pretty easy to understand. We all know what it's like to take in noise, discriminate noise, filter out what we need to respond to versus the background noise that we don't need to pay attention to. Children, if they're not in their classrooms and they're living more in a quieter house, they might become more hypersensitive to noise because they're not as stimulated around that. So it's just important to think about as we get back into society, into a normal day routine. Our kids in general all might have a little bit extra hypersensitivity as well as parents. But if we have and we're struggling with sensory issues in general, it might even be more heightened. Some things we can do to help with that auditory system, since we're not in large crowds, we're not in large gatherings, we're not in our classrooms, music can definitely help stimulate that. There's also annoying sound apps out there that you can play on your phone, which is kind of fun for kids to listen to if they are having issues with sensory information or input. You can also get your children to help you with household work. Maybe it's vacuuming, which is also giving deep proprioceptive input because it's resistive and it's noisy. Maybe it's kitchen appliances, blending things, using the shredder, basic hairdryer, whatever that might be to help work on those things. Basically, my message is this. We all might be a little bit sensory imbalanced due to our increased stress, change in routine, abnormal stimulation that we're used to. So what do? Let's all go out and exercise, try a little spinning, rocking, anything we need to do to stay happy, sane, and healthy. Happy OT month to all my fellow OTs, and I hope this gave you a little bit of tools that you can incorporate at home and your daily life. Thank you.